rows of quiet houses, a handful of industrial units on the edge of Birmingham. To anyone passing by, it all looked ordinary. Nothing about these places hinted at what was buried beneath the surface, or who truly owned them, but behind these walls ran a network built on shadows. A fortune worth millions, scattered across streets that seemed untouched by crime. Every address linked by one thread, money that could never be traced back. For years, it grew in silence until one day it all fell. This is the story of a Pakistani gang who turned drug money into a £17 million property empire, and how it all came crashing down. This was not just a handful of houses. It was a network worth £17 million, spread across 59 properties and stretching as far as Bangor, a seaside town in Northern Ireland. Each property was carefully registered. Using family members and trusted associates, the gang purchased these properties, including 34 student houses in Selly Oak, several industrial units, and even a public gym known as Rampage Fitness. In some areas, they went as far as buying up entire roads, 5 or 6 houses on single streets. 3 properties were also located in Bangor, Northern Ireland, where the network laundered cash through businesses, including a restaurant connected to Khan's relatives. None of these addresses were in the gang's names, a strategy designed to outlast any investigation. For years, no one asked questions. Tenants paid rent, the gym operated as usual, and the properties continued to grow in number. And what was hidden, however, was that every brick and mortgage payment came from the profits of heroin smuggled into the UK. The National Crime Agency would later uncover how this empire was quietly assembled over nearly a decade, piece by piece, as the gang laundered its cash into bricks and mortar. What seemed like legitimate student lettings and family homes were in fact the foundations of one of the most lucrative laundering operations in the Midlands. But the walls of this empire would not stand forever. Soon, investigators began pulling at loose threads, and what they found revealed a far darker operation behind the keys and deeds. At the center of this empire stood Amiran Zeb Khan, a figure already known to law enforcement. Khan, alongside his close associates Muhammad Ali and Sajid Hussain, operated quietly in East Birmingham. They weren't the type to flaunt wealth or draw attention. Instead, they built connections to suppliers in Pakistan, to trusted middlemen, and to networks that could move both drugs and money without leaving obvious traces. The gang's roots lay in the heroin trade. We will talk about this later in this video. One thing stands out about their operations: they operated like businessmen, with logistics, fake companies, paperwork, and even overseas contacts structured like a company. But beneath the surface, the cash flowed thick and unclean. When heroin was cut and broken down for street sale, it turned every kilo into hundreds of thousands of pounds. The group needed a way to clean this money, to turn illegal cash into assets that couldn't be seized easily, and property became their chosen cover. It offered stability, a way to reinvest criminal profits into something that looked legitimate and could continue earning through rental income. As their wealth grew, the gang expanded their inner circle. Men like Mohammad Ashraf Khan handled logistics, while Rajesh Patel provided the paperwork that gave shipments a veneer of legitimacy. Others, such as Omar Isa and Imran Arif, acted on the ground, delivering and receiving goods without ever touching the larger financial web. By 2014, this Pakistani-led network was well established, with layers of protection shielding its leaders. But their confidence would soon be tested when one of their biggest shipments came under the watchful eye of the authorities. The gang's fortune was built on heroin, But their wealth didn't appear overnight. Long before the 2014 shipments, they were already moving drug money through a web of laundering schemes stretching back several years. Alam Zeb Khan's network, tied to both heroin and cocaine trafficking, was moving millions between 2010 and 2013. Businesses like the Taj Tandoori restaurant in Bangor, owned by Khan's relatives, acted as cash funnels, with hundreds of thousands deposited in accounts that had no legitimate explanation. These early profits were channeled into property. By 2011, as we have already covered, the gang had begun buying student houses and industrial units under third-party names, laying the foundations of what would become a £17 million empire. Their method was simple yet efficient. Vast quantities moved through carefully engineered supply lines from Pakistan to the UK. By 2014, the operation had become even more sophisticated. The group organised 2 container shipments, both originating from Lahore, routed through Karachi, and arriving at London Gateway Port. Each container carried industrial machinery, heavy metal lathes, chosen because they were difficult to inspect without specialist equipment. Hidden inside the machinery were compressed packages of heroin. In February 2014, the first container slipped through undetected. Hidden within its cargo of heavy metal lathes, the heroin was concealed so well that even trained officers might have missed it without intelligence. When cut and distributed, this load alone could have been worth millions on the streets. But the gang wasn't satisfied. They moved quickly to arrange a second shipment, larger and bolder, believing their methods were foolproof. The downfall of the £17 million empire began quietly, years before the first shipping container was successfully offloaded. In December 2011, the Police Service of Northern Ireland, PSNI, flagged suspicious property activity to the National Crime Agency. Among the red flags were several addresses in Bangor, which we have covered earlier. These properties appeared to be owned by individuals with little to no legitimate income, a sign that something bigger was at play. The NCA launched its first civil recovery investigation, focusing on tracing the source of funds tied to these homes. It didn't take long for investigators to notice connections to Birmingham, particularly to East Birmingham, where a cluster of properties had been purchased under the names of family members and associates of Amiran Zeb Khan. Investigators began comparing declared incomes with the value of the assets. One case stood out: an individual earning £20,000 a year but holding multiple properties worth over £1 million combined. As Andy Lewis, head of the NCA's asset denial team, later explained, findings like these start the hairs running. From this point forward, the NCA shifted its strategy. Instead of targeting people directly, they focused on the properties, not the people, using civil recovery powers under the Proceeds of Crime Act. This would allow them to seize assets, even if the criminal network tried to remain in the shadows. By 2012, the team had mapped out a growing list of suspicious property acquisitions linked to the same group. At this stage, they didn't yet have proof of drug trafficking, but the financial patterns were impossible to ignore. Each purchase, each unexplained transfer of funds became another thread for investigators to pull. The trap was set. The operation would stretch on for years, growing into one of the NCA's longest-running asset recovery cases. By mid-2014, the gang was preparing another major shipment. As we discussed earlier, their first container, sent earlier that year, had slipped through customs unnoticed. This success had emboldened them. Confident in their methods, they orchestrated a second shipment with the same route. The container carried the same category of machinery, heavy industrial lathes. Each machine was solid and designed to look unremarkable. But this time, Border Force officers grew suspicious. Routine checks revealed anomalies in the weight and construction of the lathes. When they were cut open, officers discovered 165 kilograms of heroin. With the same 58% purity, this single load, which reports said could be diluted to produce up to 2 million street deals, with an estimated street value of £19 million. Rather than seizing it outright, the NCA and Border Force reassembled the machinery and allowed the container to continue its journey. It was a high-risk move, but it would expose everyone involved in the conspiracy. Surveillance teams trailed the cargo to an industrial unit in Sandwell, West Midlands. Cameras and audio equipment were in place, ready to capture the handover. Soon, Omar Issa and Imran Arif, two trusted members of the network, arrived to receive the delivery. Unaware they were being watched, they began unloading the lathes, believing they were moving untouched heroin worth millions. Every movement, every exchange was recorded, providing the evidence investigators had been waiting for. This sting didn't just catch the men at the bottom. It was the thread that would unravel the entire organization. The second shipment was the breakthrough the NCA had been waiting for. With the evidence from the Sandwell sting, the agency could now link the drug operation to the men behind the £17 million property empire. While much of the groundwork on the suspicious property network had already been uncovered in earlier investigations, this sting gave investigators the missing piece, proof that the cash flow was directly tied to heroin trafficking. Building on what we've already covered, the seizure of 165 kilograms of heroin and the surveillance footage of Omar Issa and Imran Arif unloading the lathes, the NCA expanded its operation. They launched a parallel criminal investigation, working alongside Border Force and West Midlands Police. Every property connected to the gang was scrutinized, but now the focus shifted to identifying how profits from drug sales were entering the property market. Civil recovery investigations, which had started in 2011, now moved in tandem with criminal probes. Officers meticulously examined bank accounts, property deeds, and company records, comparing these to declared incomes. As we've mentioned before, the discrepancies were staggering. People on modest wages were linked to properties worth millions. The NCA also dug deeper into shell companies and front businesses used by the gang. One example was the Taj Tandoori restaurant in Bangor, tied to Khan's family, which investigators alleged was used to launder significant sums before the funds were channeled into Birmingham property deals. Undercover surveillance continued throughout 2015 and 2016. Phone records, shipping documents, and financial trails all pointed back to Imran Zeb Khan as the ringleader, with Muhammad Ali and Sajid Hussain acting as his closest partners. The web of associates, Ashraf Khan, Rajesh Patel, Issa, Arif, and Zulfikar Munsaf, each played their part, from logistics to paperwork. By early 2017, arrest warrants were prepared and the operation shifted from intelligence gathering to dismantling the entire organization. In coordinated raids across Birmingham and the West Midlands, NCA teams and local police swooped on the network. Khan was arrested at his Cobham Road address. Ali was taken from his home on Wincliffe Road, while Hussain was picked up at Fieldhouse Road in Yardley. Meanwhile, Issa, Arif, Ashraf Khan, Rajesh Patel, and Zulfikar Munsaf were also detained. The arrests sent shockwaves through Birmingham. Not only had the gang been responsible for importing heroin worth tens of millions, but they had also embedded themselves deeply into the local property market. During interviews, investigators presented the gang with overwhelming evidence: the heroin seizure, surveillance footage, shipping documents, and property records. Most maintained silence, but Zulfikar Munsaf chose to plead guilty early, admitting his role as a messenger between the ringleaders and their operatives. The rest prepared to face trial. By mid-2017, the gang stood charged with conspiracy to import heroin and money laundering, setting the stage for one of Birmingham's most significant organised crime trials. In July 2017, at Birmingham Crown Court, the case against Amiran Zeb Khan and his associates came to a head. The prosecution laid out the story piece by piece, linking the gang's sprawling £17 million property empire to the proceeds of a highly organised heroin trafficking operation. Jurors were shown all the evidence from container sting, recorded surveillance footage, and detailed financial records proving how the profits were laundered into bricks and mortar across Birmingham and Northern Ireland. Their argument was clear. This was not a loose collection of drug dealers, but a coordinated network, structured like a business. Sentencing began with the ringleaders. Amiran Zeb Khan, 38, received 22 years in prison for his central role in coordinating the heroin imports and laundering the profits. Muhammad Ali, 36, was also given 22 years, recognized as a key organizer and trusted partner of Khan. Sajid Hussain, 32, was sentenced to 22 years, reflecting his part in overseeing the import routes and distribution plans. The court then turned to their associates. Mohammad Ashraf Khan, 49, was handed 17.5 years for managing logistics. Rajesh Patel, 52, who used his business connections and paperwork, was jailed for 15.5 years. Omar Isa, 36, was sentenced to 15.5 years, while Imran Arif, 35, who assisted in receiving the shipment, was given 10 years. Finally, Zulfikar Munsaf, 38, the gang's go-between, and the only member to plead guilty before the trial, was sentenced to 14 years. By the end of the trial, the group faced a total of 139 years behind bars, their property empire dismantled, and their multi-million-pound operation left in ruins. What do you make of this case and the sentences handed down to the gang? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more real UK crime stories like this, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay tuned. There's always another case waiting to be uncovered.